Og nu er det tid til lige hurtigt at debattere de her emner og refleksioner i paneldebatten, hvor I også er meget velkommen til at stille spørgsmål til sidst. Så nu vil jeg igen byde velkommen til Benjamin Biering fra Podimo, Lars Damgaard fra MediaCatch og Kasper Lindskow fra Ekstra Bladet. Yes, give it my hand. Since Benjamin is English speaking, we will switch to English now.
Thanks.
So with this final presentation reminding us to develop AI that is both human and filled with empathy, I want to start by talking about the possibilities and challenges of recommender systems that you both handled and that you, Lars, we talked earlier, also have a way into with the product MediaCatch Pulse, right? The way you design these systems have huge consequences in terms of the recommended output for the user. What are your considerations for designing this perfect mix, this perfect balance for us? Let's start with Benjamin.
Well, is there sound?
Yeah, we need some sound for Benjamin. Yeah.
Yeah. So Agnes made a lot of good points in her presentation. And she mentioned information bubble. So it means that you some recommender system can lock the users into always rediscovering the same things, right? And that's a huge problem. I mean, at Podimo we have been partnering with people from Spotify because they experienced that they have discovered this phenomenon for music. Like people only listen to the little niche and they stay in there, but it's not really good because they don't get to discover new stuff, and then eventually they churn because they don't use the service enough. So they are trying to keep the users happy and satisfied, but at the same time try to diversify the recommendations. And this is also what we're doing.
And what is the perfect balance, Kasper? What is the perfect balance for you as a user if you were to switch to the other side for a recommender system?
Sure,
what do you really want for it?
Yeah, so I think for us, the perfect balance is the same balance that we've always strived for. So in the sense that as a news publisher, we've always taken responsibility for the news flow we put out there, while also trying to balance that against what people actually want to read. So that's sort of historically come into sort of being our editorial profile. And it's really that same balance that we want to strive for with recommender systems. So being matched with our editorial profile. It's just, in some ways, a lot harder to do it when you personalize stuff because you can't see the news flow in front of you anymore. It's personalized. You have thousands of them, millions of them. So you do need good metrics. Things have to be quantified in this world, which has its limitations, but it's just needed. So for us, it's about striving for the same alignment and trying to have metrics and buttons to push that allow us to actually achieve that alignment.
Mm-hmm. We all know these systems very, very well. We use them all the time. It's everywhere we look. The tech giants have used these and mastering it basically now. So what do we want to, as Danish media, what do we want to take away? What do we want to do the same way, and what do we want to do differently? I know you have an opinion, Lars, even though you're not developing these recommender systems. What do you think is the perfect balance?
Yeah, but it's always difficult to talk about the perfect balance when it's recommendation engines, because you also need to not have the filter bubble, and you are working with that. But I think from our perspective that we first of all need to have a lot of data. But our way of working with a recommendation engine is almost quite the opposite, because when we work with media monitoring and our own media monitoring product called MediaCatch Pulse, we don't want people to look at a lot of stuff, but we want to look them at the exact right 3 or 4 stories that they need to know about. But everything else they don't need to look at that. So we, in our way of using recommendation systems, it's some of the same indicators that you're using, but we just use them in maybe the opposite way. We don't want to have people staying a lot of time in their email or in our system. We just want them to fix the problem so they can spend more time on their actual work. So that's a bit opposite of you guys.
I think if you get more into sort of what we want to do differently from what we think we're seeing on social platforms, there's really a number of things. Value alignment, as I said before, is a major part of that, because our values are just different from a social media platform. But In addition to that, I think I just lost my point because I gave
Maybe we should
long
ask
introduction.
Benjamin
Let's
also.
Benjamin.
I just have one point to make. Last year, I think it was, Facebook got a lot of heat because of fake news, and they have discovered that fake news travel faster than normal news because people share them like way more. And the recommender engine, which is probably like a combination of many different, but it's optimized towards engagement. So they only care about the clicks. And a lot of managers at Facebook pointed it out and said, hey, maybe that's not the right way to do it. So when you train these systems, you can, of course, try to optimize and maximize the output towards engagement. So you want people to stay on your platform, to consume as much as you want, but you can also imagine a different way of training these systems. You could, for example, optimize for learning instead of engagement. And so you could provide different experiences, right?
That was really the point I was trying to get to, is that it's so good, well stated, but I think it also plays on what you said. No, it's just that what we think we're seeing in social media platforms is really optimizing towards these engagement metrics. And ultimately, we want to optimize our systems towards something else than that are more aligned with our editorial values. It's a balance because we also want engagement, but as always, we always wanted to also point readers to stories we think are important. And there's a big challenge here because no matter what we want, then from all the systems that are out there, we inherit those metrics from all of the different systems that's already been developed. So we're trying to take some steps towards optimizing towards more nuanced metrics, but ultimately what we want is to be able to optimize towards long-term user welfare, it's usually called, or long-term societal welfare. But we're taking small steps. It's the ultimate goal. It's not one that we can reach within the next 3 or 4 years or so, but it's what we should ultimately be striving for. And that takes completely different architectures with reinforcement learning, all sorts of advanced stuff that's still immature technologically. Yeah.
And the discussion of user welfare is, of course, important to keep having. Lars, to train these recommender systems, you need the machines to understand the content of the articles and the podcast and the video, and this is what your company specializes in. Speech, text, and facial recognition. But what is possible now, and what could be really useful in the future to put into systems like recommendation systems?
I think the crazy answer is actually everything is possible right now, but it's just an idea of how you prioritize, because there's enough data. You need to prioritize what to use and what kind of data to use. I think it was a great example we saw with the Volvo case, actually. We are doing some of the same stuff that we're looking at scene detections. Is it a soccer match on a television station? Then it might there's roaring on the stadium, so there might be a goal. There's a lot of factors you can factor in, but the algorithm will never be smarter than we, the humans, make it in the beginning. Of course, we can train and retrain, but it's still us that has the ethical responsibility to do it. And we also have seen that because we've been working with Danish speech-to-text, and in the beginning, some month ago, we were like, we're not that good at understanding what the young people actually are saying on TikTok. We might train and retrain with more data from young people. We might train and retrain with more data from different parts of Jutland, because the algorithm will never be better than the data itself. But everything is possible. You just need to prioritize in your schematics what you want to do with it.
But what parameters, or what you want to call it, what features are important when you want to train these recommender systems to work well for you? For instance, Benjamin in Podimo, I know you were talking about tags on topics, but what about mood or style or things like that?
So to be honest, we try to put as many features as we can. Right, so we will have features which are related to podcast audiobooks. We have features related to the users themselves. Features related to the interactions between the users and podcast or audiobooks, and we try to engineer as many features as possible. So we use an architecture that is from Google, that is called Wide and Deep, and I think in their original paper they had like 3,000 features or something like that. So I don't think there is a limitation to how many features you can use. Actually, the more the better, because the features which have zero predictive power, they will be left out automatically by the system. So like you shouldn't be worried to have too many features.
I want to explore kind of the pros and cons of building your own system versus kind of buying them off the shelf, because both Kasper and Lars have been talking about building their own systems, and I know that Podimo have bought Elvenir, as you mentioned. Why not develop your own system? We'll start with you, Benjamin.
Yeah, okay, so speech-to-text is difficult, right? So it takes a lot of time, a lot of resources, and more critically, actually, maybe it's the data. Like you spend a lot of time gathering the data set to train your algorithms. That's too much work, and that's not our core competence. So this is definitely something that we want to buy, we want to outsource. We don't want to own that, right? We prefer to buy a commodity. When it comes to recommender systems, I do believe that the architecture that you use is not that important. There was a research paper published a couple of years ago that said, I think the title was a bit catchy, it was like, are we making real progress with recommender systems? And then they were comparing a lot of different models and the claimed results, and then they realized, okay, actually beating a baseline, a collaborative filtering system is really hard, right? So buying recommender systems, there are a lot of companies providing recommendations as a service. So you just send them your data, and then they will train a model and actually serve the recommendations for you. There are some really interesting models which are based on the value. So if they make a recommendations and there is a conversion behind, then you pay them. If no one interacts with their recommendations, then they don't make any money. Right? So that's super interesting. But in the case, in the case of Podimo, I think it's the value lies in the data and how we engineer the features and how maybe we tweak a little bit the math of the models, not so much the models themselves. Okay.
I'm guessing Kasper disagrees. And I've heard many of these recommender systems you buy are for e-commerce. So Kasper, why build a journalistic recommender system?
So yes, I disagree, but only partially.
Okay.
In the sense that the AI domains that really sort of affect the core of what we do, we need to insource them. But there are other AI domains that don't affect the core, so we might not need to insource those. So we insource the recommender systems because we really want to have control over those. And we insource the NLP systems because they're really important for interpreting our text-based content. We'd like to also insource computer vision and text and speech-to-text. But that might be less core, and we need to prioritize. So we might be buying in those spaces.
Just call me.
Yes, I knew you'd say that. And then, can I make one small point? It's just because I think it's an important point because we have those discussions about are we really moving the needle with recommender systems. And just our experience is that we're seeing that in the ideal scenario, we only move the needle a little bit by some advanced content-based systems compared to collaborative filtering systems, only a little bit. But the reasons why we are actually leaning more towards advanced content-based systems is two reasons. First is that it's only in the ideal scenario that we see that we only move the needle a little bit. There are so many scenarios out there where we need to recommend old articles, stuff that collaborative filtering just can't do. So for us, having that portfolio, it's really practical because it allows us to apply recommenders in a lot of different use cases where they create value, not just one. The other point is that we do see that they affect the news flow very differently. So even though they might be the same, almost the same, measured on AUC in the lab or CTR rates out in real life, we need to have a portfolio, otherwise we'd completely skew our news flow towards either something with a popularity bias or something with a low serendipity or whatever it might be. So just to nuance that a little bit. The core point is correct.
I absolutely agree.
Sure.
That was a lot of difficult terms. I'm guessing you can ask Kasper about that afterwards also. But Lars, I want to just finish up with you because you developed every part of your API. Why not handpick what to develop and what to buy on shelf?
The straight answer is actually we want to be independent of big tech. That's a core thing for us as a company, and also that we want to control the most, all the things that we can control. And it's also a question about scale. We are a very small company. We would not be able to do what we do today, monitoring live in Denmark on 40 broadcast TV channels, 15 Danish radio channels, 24/7. If we had to pay Google or Azure for the speech-to-text, Amazon for the facial recognition and so on, that wouldn't be possible. And we can also see that the customers are not fond of big tech anymore in the same way. And since we are local, we have the local knowledge also. So that's the reasons for not. And of course, We don't start from scratch every time. We will, of course, like with our speech-to-text model, as I also told, that, of course, if there are open data models out there, we're going to start with them and then build on top and perfecting what we do, but we want to do it ourselves.
There's so much to talk about, but we want to take time to have questions from the room. We have one down here. Please wait for the microphone, just a second.
It's beautiful that you're moving away from big tech. Congratulations. But it seems to me that you're kind of replicating what they are doing. You're copying what they are doing. You're collecting as much data as possible, I suppose also third-party data, and you control the data. You're not giving the control to your users. So do you expect that we will trust you also in the future? Because, as you said, Lars, we don't trust big tech anymore. How can we trust you?
I don't quite understand the question, maybe. Some of it
but
I understand because...
Especially Spotify and Ekstra Bladet, more than you, because they are collecting a lot of data to personalize.
We don't collect any personal data at all.
So it's more the others.
We are building the data models and having people recording, writing, and so on. So we are building models. We don't collect any data from anyone. I think we might have a cookie or two on our website, so you're actually able to log in. Yeah.
Yeah, but then let's move on to Kasper and Benjamin.
Sure. So yes, personalizing content requires user data. And the way we try to do it as responsibly as we can, certainly, is firstly, we only rely on first-party data, which means it's our own data, we control it, we don't sell it to anyone, we don't get data from anyone else. We make sure that you can opt out, both in the sense of saying no to collection of data. You can also just opt out to having profiling or recommenders at all. I think we could improve on how available we make that option. It's available, but we could improve on it. We try to make sure that we're transparent. So on extrabladet.dk, you will see that I think it's different from what other people are doing, but whenever there's a recommender in play, or even just a non-personalized NLP algorithm, there'll be a question mark saying, here an algorithm is at play, click here to learn more, all this. And then we're trying to, on our roadmap, we're trying to move forward with explainability. And ultimately, if we can, we want to that control room to the front page editors. We'd love to be able to take elements of that and allow the users to control them. But that's really hard to do technically, so that's not a promise I can make that we'll actually achieve that within sort of a short-term time frame. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Benjamin, would you like to answer as well?
Yeah. So we also collect user data. Right? So when they interact in the app and when they listen to stuff. But then in turn we use that data in an anonymous way, like we don't care who the data points belong to, and we only use it to optimize the user experience. So in that sense I don't really see the problem of using user-generated data because it provides value for the users and of course for us. What I would like is to be able to give transparency back to the user and say, hey, we have a bunch of recommender systems. This is how we recommend content to you, and you can maybe also be able to tweak the objective metrics. That would be really good.
Mm. I'm afraid we ran out of time much more quickly than I anticipated. So we have to take a break now. We only have 15 minutes for a break. So please reach out to these three young men in the panel, and thank you.